Hello, boring dreamers. Today, we are going to travel back to a time of soot-stiff corsets and drafty drawing rooms to watch a single piece of German flora conquer the British Empire and completely rewrite the rulebook on how we celebrate winter. Imagine standing in a Victorian parlor, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and roasting goose, as the flickering light of real wax candles illuminates a towering fir tree dripping with glass, gold, and sugar. It is a scene of pure magic, though considering the combination of dry pine needles and open flames, you probably won't survive this without at least singeing your eyebrows or burning the house down. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop a comment, letting me know where in the world you are currently drifting off from and what time is on the clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on a cobblestone street in London, and the first thing you notice is the overwhelming, suffocating darkness. It is late December, sometime in the 1830s, just a few years before the Victorian era properly kicks into high gear. The air is cold, not the crisp, refreshing cold of a ski resort, but a damp, heavy chill that seeps through the soles of your leather boots and settles deep in your bones. The street lamps are few and far between, casting weak, yellowish pools of gaslight that barely penetrate the thick soup of fog rolling off the Thames. You wrap your wool coat tighter around yourself, but it feels like wrapping a napkin around an iceberg. This is the world before the Christmas tree. It feels empty, doesn't it? You trudge toward a townhouse, the mud sucking at your heels with a squelching sound that creates a lovely, rhythmic ASMR backdrop for your walk. You are looking for the holiday spirit, for that explosion of red and green and twinkling lights that you associate with the season. But as you look up at the windows of the houses, they are dark. Maybe a single candle flickers in a window pane, but there are no strings of electric bulbs, no inflatable snowmen, and certainly no pine trees strapped to the roofs of carriages. You step inside a respectable home, shaking the London grime off your coat. The interior is dimly lit by the fireplace and costly tallow candles. You scan the living room, or the drawing room, as you should call it if you want to be invited back for tea. You are looking for the focal point. In your time, you would expect a 6-foot Norman fir standing in the corner, dominating the room. Here, the corner is empty. It's just a corner. It looks naked, frankly. Instead, the room is decorated with a chaotic, somewhat pagan assortment of greenery. There are sprigs of holly tucked behind the picture frames, scratching the wallpaper. There is ivy draped over the mantelpiece, looking a bit like it's trying to strangle the clock. And hanging from the center of the ceiling is not a disco ball, but a kissing bough. This is the great ancestor of your modern decorations. A double hoop of wire covered in evergreens, apples, candles, and ribbons with a sprig of mistletoe dangling underneath. It's charming in a rustic, I might have been made by a druid sort of way, but it lacks the majesty you are craving. This pre-Victorian winter festival is a strange beast. It isn't the child-centric, gift-wrapping extravaganza, you know. It is an adult affair, focused on eating, drinking, and gaming. It is a survival mechanism against the dark. You sit by the fire, listening to the wind rattle the single-pane glass, and you realize why they needed this. Without central heating, without the internet, without even a decent library system, December in England is a long gray tunnel of despair. You need something to break the monotony. But the Christmas of the 1830s is, dare we say, a bit stale. It's on life support. The old medieval traditions of the Lord of Misrule, where servants became masters, and everyone got riotously drunk, have largely faded away, killed off by the Industrial Revolution, and a general sense of uptight propriety. The holiday feels like a hangover from a party that ended a century ago. It's happening, but nobody's heart is really in it. Here is a mainstream historical fact to ground you in the gloom. In the early 19th century, many businesses in Britain didn't even consider Christmas a holiday. Parliament sat on Christmas Day. Factories hummed. A Bank Holidays Act that would guarantee time off was decades away. For the working poor, December 25th was just another Tuesday, perhaps with a slightly better dinner if they were lucky. The idea of shutting down the entire country to stare at a tree would have sounded like madness to the pragmatic Georgians. You wander over to the hearth, warming your frozen hands. The centerpiece here isn't a tree, but the Yule log. It's a massive, gnarled stump of wood that was dragged in from the forest with great ceremony. The tradition says you have to light it with a scrap of wood saved from last year's log. A nice bit of continuity that ensures you are hoarding charred wood in your cupboard all year round. It's burning brightly, offering the only real cheer in the room. But let's be honest, staring at a burning log is nice, but it's not exactly magical in the way a glittering tree is. It's just combustion. There is a scholarly debate simmering in the background of this smoky room. Historians still argue whether the decline of Christmas in the early 19th century was real, or if it was a narrative invented by the Victorians later on to make themselves look like the saviors of the season. Some argue that the holiday was alive and well in the countryside, full of folk songs and wassailing, and that it only seemed dead in the cities because the urban elite, the people writing the diaries and newspapers, were too busy being miserable and industrial to notice. Regardless of who is right, the vibe in this room is undeniable. It feels like something is missing. There is a void in the center of the domestic sphere. The family is scattered. The men are at the club. The children are tucked away in the nursery, out of sight and out of mind. And the women are doing needlepoint in the semi-darkness. There is no magnet to draw them all together. There is no glowing totem to gather around. You look at the empty corner again. It screams for height. It screams for color. The drab browns and grays of the pre-Victorian interior design, meant to hide the soot from the coal fires, are oppressive. You find yourself yearning for the smell of pine resin, for the glint of candlelight on a green needle. You realize that the Christmas tree wasn't just a decoration. It was a solution. It was a technological and aesthetic fix for the crushing gloom of a northern winter. But for now, you have to endure the darkness. You watch the darkness of that London street fades, dissolving like ink in water, and the scene reassembles itself into something far more opulent. You are no longer standing in the mud. You are standing on polished parquet floors that smell of lemon oil and prestige. The year is 1800 Christmas Day, to be precise, and you have infiltrated the Queen's Lodge at Windsor. The air here is warmer, perfumed with lavender and the heavy, powdery scent of expensive wigs. You are here to witness a historical injustice, or at the very least, a historical rebranding. You see, everyone credits Queen Victoria with the Christmas tree, but she was technically the sequel. The original pilot episode happened here, hosted by her grandmother, Queen Charlotte. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz is a woman of immense dignity, currently navigating the chaotic energy of a Christmas party that involves dozens of the royal family's children and a select group of local families. She stands near the center of the room, dressed in heavy silks that rustle with every movement like dry leaves. She is German, and like many expats, she missed the comforts of home. So she did what any queen with an unlimited budget would do. She imported them. But look at the center of the room. This is the plot twist. You are expecting a towering 6-foot fir tree standing on the floor. Instead, your gaze is drawn to a large table covered in a white damask cloth. Sitting in the middle of it is not a whole tree, but a single massive bough of yew. This is the Christmas tree, V1.0. It is a branch, likely cut from the ancient yew trees that line the English churchyards. It is stuck into a large pot or tub filled with damp sand to keep it upright. It looks a bit like a bonsai tree on steroids. The yew is an interesting choice because in British folklore, it is traditionally associated with death in graveyards. Using it to celebrate the birth of Christ is a bit of a goth power move that most historians overlook. But the dark, dense green of the yew needles provides the perfect backdrop for the main event, the bling. You step closer to inspect the decorations, careful not to knock over a passing duke. The yew branch is groaning under the weight of the ornamentation. There are no glass balls, yet those are still a twinkle in a German glassblower's eye. Instead, the branch is hung with fruits, oranges stuck with cloves, almonds wrapped in gold leaf, and raisins in small paper baskets. But the real showstoppers are the candles. Small wax tapers are wired directly onto the stiff branches. This is a terrifying engineering feat. The yew is dry, the room is drafty, and you are essentially looking at a fire hazard that has been invited to dinner. A servant stands nearby with a wet sponge on a stick, known as a douser, watching the flames with the intensity of a bomb disposal technician. You probably shouldn't breathe too heavily in this direction, or you might ignite the entire Hanoverian dynasty. The children, however, are mesmerized. This is the German fashion, a dazzling novelty to the British guests. They stare at the illuminated branch with wide eyes. Queen Charlotte has effectively brought a piece of the Black Forest to Berkshire. Here is a mainstream historical fact that often gets buried. Queen Charlotte didn't just have one tree. She often had multiple. She would set up a large yew bough for the main room, but she also introduced the custom of giving individual, smaller trees or decorated bush to specific members of the household. It was a personalized, boutique experience. It wasn't about the one giant tree for the town square. It was about intimate, glowing vignettes scattered through the palace. The atmosphere in the room is one of controlled chaos. You watch as the children are told to form a line. In the German tradition that Charlotte grew up with, the tree wasn't just a decoration. It was the delivery system for the presents. The gifts aren't wrapped in paper and piled on the floor. They are literally tied to the tree or laid out on the table directly underneath the branches. You see dolls, wooden soldiers, and perhaps most excitedly for the kids' packets of sugared almonds and marzipan. It's a scene of pure joy, but it feels contained. This is a private party. The windows are draped with heavy velvet. The magic happening in this room is a secret shared by the aristocracy. The common folk outside in Windsor might hear rumors of the Queen's illuminated bush, but they have no idea what it actually looks like. It's like a VIP club where the entry fee is having blue blood. As you watch the candles burn down, dripping hot wax onto the pristine tablecloth, much to the horror of the housekeeping staff, you have to wonder why this didn't catch on immediately. Charlotte did this every year until her death in 1818. Why aren't we calling them Charlotte trees? This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit about the ephemeral nature of trends. The aristocracy did copy her. For a brief period in the early 19th century, having a German tree was the ultimate status symbol for the upper crust of British society. If you were a wealthy banker or a duke, you threw a party with a yew branch to show that you were cultured and connected to the court, but it never trickled down. It remained a rich person's hobby, like polo or tax evasion. The average chimney sweep in London had no access to wax candles or gold leaf, so the tradition stayed locked in the drawing rooms of the elite. Historians still argue whether the failure of Charlotte's tree to go viral was purely due to economics, or if it was political. The later years of George III's reign were marred by his illness, what we now suspect was porphyria, and the Regency era that followed was defined by the extravagance and scandal of his son, George IV. The moral wholesomeness of Charlotte's little German Christmas party got lost in the noise of a monarchy that was slowly becoming unpopular. The family values brand hadn't been invented yet. You watch Queen Charlotte move through the room. She hands a small gilded toy to a child who bows clumsily. She smiles, and for a moment, the stiff formality of the court melts away. She is just a grandmother trying to recreate the magic of her own childhood. She has no idea that she is planting a seed that will lie dormant in the British soil for decades, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. The candles are sputtering now. The smell of extinguished wicks, that distinct, acrid smoke, begins to mix with the citrus and pine. The servants move in to dismantle the magic before it burns the palace down. The yew branch, stripped of its glory, looks suddenly like what it is: a piece of a graveyard hedge stuck in a pot. You feel the scene fading. The laughter of the children echoes and dims. You are drifting away from the warm glow of the Queen's Lodge. The first attempt at the Christmas tree has happened, and it was beautiful, but it was a false start. It was a tree that fell in the forest or the palace, and didn't make a sound loud enough for the rest of the world to hear. To truly change the world, the tree needs more than just a queen. It needs a narrative. It needs a lonely child who will cling to this memory like a life raft. You feel the years rushing past you like a fast-forwarded film. The candles flicker out, the king dies, the regency passes, and the stage is reset for a new player. You are moving toward Kensington, toward a damp palace, and a little girl who is strictly forbidden from having any fun at all, except the opulence of Windsor fades, replaced by the stifling, dusty atmosphere of Kensington Palace. It is the 1820s, and you are walking down a hallway that feels less like a royal residence and more like a high-security boarding school. The air is still, smelling of lavender and strict discipline. This is the childhood home of the future Queen Victoria, and frankly, it's a bit of a prison. You find yourself peering into a nursery. There is a young girl there, small for her age, with large, expressive eyes that seem to take in everything. This is Victoria. She is technically a princess, but her life is not a fairy tale. She is growing up under the Kensington system, a suffocating set of rules devised by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and the ambitious Sir John Conroy. The system is designed to make her dependent, to isolate her from her royal uncles, and to turn her into a puppet. She sleeps in her mother's room. She is never allowed to be alone. She has no real friends. It is a lonely, grayscale existence. You watch her playing with her doll's wooden figures she has named and cataloged in a ledger. It's a way for her to exert control in a world where she has none. She moves them around a dollhouse with precise, deliberate motions. You feel a pang of sympathy. Being a princess looks exhausting. But then, the calendar turns to December 24th. The atmosphere in Kensington shifts. The heavy curtains seem to pull back just a fraction. The Duchess of Kent, despite her controlling nature, is German. And like Queen Charlotte before her, she refuses to let Christmas be a drab English affair. For one night, the Kensington system cracks open to let the light in. You follow the young Victoria as she is led downstairs. She is vibrating with anticipation. This is the moment she waits for all year. The doors to the drawing room are thrown open, and there it is. Not a yew branch this time. A proper pine tree. It is set on a table because floor trees are still considered a tripping hazard or simply gauche, and it is blazing with light. Victoria gasps. You can see the reflection of the candles in her eyes. For a child who lives in a world of rules and shadows, this tree is a portal to another dimension. It is anarchy and beauty wrapped in fir needles. Victoria's diary entries from this time are your primary source for this scene. She describes the trees, yes, often plural again, with an intensity that borders on worship. After dinner, we went into the drawing room, she writes, where the tables were covered with trees. Note the plural. The German tradition of giving each person their own little tree is still in effect here. It's like getting a personal pizza, but it's a tree, and it's on fire. You watch as she approaches her table. The tree is hung with gingerbread, sugar ornaments, and small gifts. But for Victoria, the tree itself is the gift. It represents a connection to a heritage she is told is better than the English court. It represents her mother's love, however complicated and smothering that love might be. In the glow of the candles, the tension between mother and daughter dissolves for a few hours. They are just a German family celebrating Heilige Abend, Christmas Eve. This is a crucial psychological anchor for the future queen. You realize as you watch her face that she associates the Christmas tree with safety. In a life filled with political intrigue and manipulative adults, the tree is a pure, uncorrupted symbol of domestic happiness. It is the one time a year she feels like a normal child. But here is the quirky tidbit that history often glosses over. The trees didn't stay up. In the modern world, we leave our trees up until January or March if you're lazy. But in 1820s Kensington, the tree was a one-night-only engagement. It was lit on Christmas Eve. The gifts were distributed, and then, that was it. The candles burned down, the sugar was eaten, and the tree was often dismantled the next day. It was a flashbulb memory, intense and fleeting. This scarcity made it even more valuable to Victoria. It was a fleeting glimpse of magic. It vanished as quickly as it arrived. You also notice something else in the room, or rather, someone else. Hovering in the background, watching the festivities with a mix of affection and calculation, is Victoria's governess, Louise Lezen. Lezen is also German, and she is the one who feeds Victoria's love for these traditions. She whispers stories of German forests, of cozy winters in Hanover. She is reinforcing the idea that German equals good and cozy, while English equals cold and political. The Christmas tree is becoming a weapon in the culture war for Victoria's soul. Historians still argue about how much of Victoria's love for the tree was genuine nostalgia, and how much was a subconscious rebellion against the English court. By embracing the German custom so fiercely, was she signaling her allegiance to her mother's roots? Or was she just a kid who liked shiny things? The answer is probably both. But the result is that the tree becomes imprinted on her DNA. As the evening winds down, you see the young princess clutching a new doll, staring at the dying embers of the tree candles. The wax is dripped onto the table, forming little white pools. The smell of burnt pine fills the room. She looks happy. It is a rare, uncomplicated emotion for her. You know that soon, the doors will close. The Kensington system will reassert itself. She will go back to sleeping in her mother's room, back to the lonely lessons, back to the watchful eyes of Sir John Conroy. But she will carry the image of that glowing tree with her. It will sustain her through the teenage years of isolation. And more importantly, she will file it away in her mind as a must-have for her future life. You step back into the shadows of the palace corridor. You leave the lonely princess with her melting candles. You know that her solitude is about to end. A handsome prince is on his way. A prince who happens to be growing up in a castle surrounded by real forests. A prince who takes Christmas very, very seriously. When these two lonely, sentimental royals collide, the reaction will be nuclear. They won't just celebrate Christmas. They will weaponize it. They will take this private, tabletop tradition and blow it up to an industrial scale. But first, we have to travel across the channel to meet the other half of this power couple. We have to go to cope. The musty corridors of Kensington Palace dissolve into a crisp, biting wind. You are now standing in the courtyard of Rosenau Castle, near Coburg, Germany. The landscape here is vastly different from the gray sprawl of London. It is a world of dense, brooding forests and hills, dusted with pristine white snow. This is the land of the Brothers Grimm, of dark fairy tales and deep winter traditions. And standing on a balcony, looking out over this frozen kingdom, is a young man with soulful eyes and a truly impressive mustache in the making. This is Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. If Victoria's childhood was a prison drama, Albert's is a romantic tragedy. His parents separated when he was barely a toddler. His mother banished from the court, never to see her children again. He grew up with a deep, melancholy sensitivity, clinging to the stability of tradition. And for a German prince in the 1830s, the ultimate tradition is Weihnachten. You watch Albert during the holiday season in Coburg. He doesn't just celebrate Christmas, he inhabits it. To him, the Tannenbaum, fir tree, isn't just a decoration. It's a sacred object. It connects him to the memory of his exiled mother, to the warmth of his brother Ernest, and to the very soul of the German people. He is the kind of guy who probably cries when he hears a really good carol. He is intense, earnest, and deeply sentimental. Fast forward a few years. It is 1840. Albert has married Victoria. He has moved to England, a country that greets him with all the warmth of a wet blanket. The British aristocracy thinks he's stiff and boring. The public thinks he's a foreign interloper. He is lonely, frustrated, and homesick. He is living in Windsor Castle, a place that is drafty, chaotic, and decidedly not Coburg. But Albert is a man of action. If he can't go back to Germany, he will turn Windsor into Germany. You are now in the Queen's private sitting room at Windsor Castle. It is December 1840, their first Christmas as a married couple. Albert is in charge. He is moving furniture with his own hands, which scandalizes the servants. He is directing the placement of the trees. And notice the plural again. Albert doesn't do half measures. He installs spruce firs on tables, hanging them with sweetmeats and wax tapers. But here is the difference. Albert isn't just recreating the Kensington tableau for Victoria. He is expanding the franchise. He sets up trees not just for the Queen, but for the royal household, for the schools he patronizes, and for the army barracks. He is an evangelist for the evergreen. He believes that the sight of a lit tree will morally improve people. It's a very Victorian idea that beauty leads to goodness. You watch him decorating. He is meticulous. He hangs wafer-thin biscuits, intricate glass beads, and gilded nuts. He places the candles with the precision of an architect, ensuring the light distribution is optimal. Victoria watches him, absolutely besotted. She writes in her journal, "He has a very great taste and arranges everything so beautifully." To her, Albert isn't just decorating. He is creating a sanctuary. He is building the happy family home neither of them really had. The sensory details in this room are overwhelming. The smell is a potent mix of pine resin from the fresh trees, melting wax, and the cinnamon spice scent of the German cookies Albert insisted on baking. The heat from the candles makes the pine needles release their oil, filling the room with a forest scent that masks the usual odors of a 19th century castle, which were, let's just say, not great. But Albert's ambition goes beyond the castle walls. He begins to import spruce tops from his homeland. This is a logistical nightmare in 1840. Imagine shipping hundreds of young trees across the stormy North Sea in winter. But Albert doesn't care. He wants the right trees. He wants the specific Abies piscia, Norway spruce, that grew in the Thuringian forest. He is the first person to act like a modern Christmas tree snob, insisting on a specific species for the aesthetic. Here is a quirky fringe tidbit. Albert's obsession with trees extended to a fear of them dying too soon. He was known to have the gardeners transplant the trees back into the ground after Christmas. He couldn't bear the waste. So, the grounds of Windsor and Osborne House became a retirement home for former Christmas trees. It's an early form of eco-consciousness, or perhaps just extreme sentimental hoarding. Historians still argue about the true extent of Albert's introduction of the tree. As we saw with Queen Charlotte, the tree was already there, but Albert is the one who branded it. Charlotte made it a royal quirk. Albert made it a moral imperative. He tied the tree to the concept of the nuclear family. He positioned the tree as the center of the domestic circle, the place where father, mother, and children gathered in harmony. In a time of rapid industrialization and social unrest, this image of family unity was powerful propaganda. You stand in the corner of the room, watching the young couple. They are laughing. They are speaking German to each other. For a moment, they aren't the most powerful people on earth. They are just two 20-somethings playing house. Albert hands Victoria a present from under the branch. Her eyes light up. The Kensington system is dead. The lonely days at Coburg are gone. They have created a new tradition, a synthesis of their pasts. But this private joy is still locked behind the castle gates. The British public has no idea what is going on in the Queen's drawing room. They might hear rumors of German customs, but they can't see it. The technology of mass media is just beginning to wake up. The printing press is hungry for content. And in a few years, an artist is going to sketch this very scene: Albert, Victoria, the children, and the tree, and that sketch is going to change the world faster than any royal decree. You feel the timeline shifting forward. The intimate, candlelit room is about to be exposed to the flashbulb of history. The tree is about to go from a royal secret to a global viral sensation. But to understand how that happens, we have to look at the medium that made it possible: the illustrated newspaper. You are now standing in a bustling, ink-stained print shop on the Strand in London. The year is 1848. The air is thick with the smell of chemicals and damp paper. Massive steam-powered presses are thumping rhythmically, thud, clack, churning out news for the hungry masses. You are witnessing the birth of the modern media cycle. This is the headquarters of the Illustrated London News, the world's first illustrated weekly newspaper. In the mid-19th century, this publication is Instagram, TikTok, and CNN rolled into one. It is the visual window to the world for the rising middle class. If it's in the ILN, it's happening. If it's not, it doesn't matter. You watch an engraver working at a desk. He is hunched over a block of boxwood, carving a scene with painstaking precision. He is working from a sketch made at Windsor Castle. The image is titled "Christmas Tree at Windsor Castle." It depicts Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and their children standing around a tabletop fir tree. But look closely at the image. The artist has made some adjustments. He has removed the Queen's crown. She's just a mom here. He has removed Albert's sash and medals. He's just a dad. The royal couple isn't sitting on thrones. They are standing casually, surrounded by toys and happy toddlers. The tree is the star. It is symmetrical, glowing with candles, and topped with an angel that looks suspiciously like a young Victoria. This woodcut is about to become the most influential Christmas image in history. When the December supplement hits the stands, it goes viral. We are talking 19th century viral, which means people literally running to the newsstands, passing the paper from hand to hand in coffee houses, and pinning the page up on their walls. Why does this specific image break the internet of 1848? Because it sells a fantasy that is attainable. The British public looks at this picture and thinks, wait, I can't have the castle. I can't have the crown. I can't have the private army. But I can get a tree. I can get candles. I can be like them. It is the ultimate stars. They're just like us. Moment. By stripping away the royal regalia and focusing on the domestic scene, the ILN turns the Christmas tree into a democratized symbol of family happiness. It stops being a weird German aristocratic quirk and starts being the proper British thing to do. You watch the reaction ripple through society. The engraving is copied, pirated, and reprinted everywhere. In America, Godey's Lady's Book, a vogue of the 19th century, reprints the image a few years later. And here is a hilarious fringe tidbit. They edit out the Queen's crown, if it was there in their version, and Albert's mustache. Why the mustache? Because American men in the 1850s were mostly clean-shaven, and the editors wanted the father figure to look like a generic American dad, not a German prince. They essentially photoshopped the royalty right out of it to make it palatable for a republic. This edited image is often credited with kickstarting the Christmas tree craze in the United States, proving that plagiarism is the sincerest form of holiday spirit. Back in London, the effect is immediate. You can feel the shift in the atmosphere. The pre-Victorian void we talked about in Section 1 is filling up fast. People are looking at their empty corners and feeling a sudden, burning inadequacy. Where is our tree? The children ask. Why don't we have a glowing fir branch? The Illustrated London News didn't just report on the trend, it manufactured it. It created the fear of missing out, FOMO, a century before the term existed. The image established the visual grammar of the Christmas tree, the candles, the presents underneath, the angel on top, the family gathering. It codified the ritual. Before this, you could celebrate Christmas however you wanted: Yule log, kissing bough, getting drunk on wassail. After this, if you didn't have a tree, you were doing it wrong. Historians still argue about the intentionality of this. Did the royal family release this image as a calculated PR move to soften their image during a time of Republican revolutions in Europe? 1848 was the year of revolutions, after all. Or was it just a newspaper editor looking for a heartwarming filler story? The timing suggests the former. By presenting the monarchy as a relatable, cozy, middle-class family unit, they inoculated themselves against the anti-royal sentiment sweeping the continent. The Christmas tree was, in a way, a counter-revolutionary device. It said, "Don't overthrow the government. Stay home and decorate a pine tree." You walk out of the print shop and onto the street. You see a man carrying a rolled-up copy of the ILN under his arm. He is walking with purpose. He is heading toward Covent Garden Market. You follow him. You know what he is going to buy. The demand is about to explode. The supply chain is nowhere near ready. The forests of England are about to be raided. The nurserymen are about to become millionaires. The woodcut that went viral has unleashed a monster. The gentle, nostalgic tradition of Coburg has collided with the voracious appetite of British consumerism. The quiet, holy night is over. The frantic scramble for spruce tops has begun. And you, dear dreamer, are about to wade into the muddiest, most chaotic shopping spree in Victorian history. The ink on the Illustrated London News is barely dry, and already the streets of London are transforming into a battlefield of botanical commerce. You are standing in the middle of Covent Garden Market, but forget the sanitized, tourist-friendly piazza you might know today. This is the 1850s. It is loud, it is dirty, and it smells of horse manure, rotting cabbage, and desperate ambition. This is ground zero for the Christmas tree gold rush. The viral woodcut of the royal family has done its work. Every middle-class family with a few shillings to spare lawyers, clerks, shopkeepers has decided they must have a tree. It is no longer optional. It is a badge of respectability. If you don't have a tree, are you even civilized? Are you even British? You watch the chaos unfold. Carts are rumbling in from the countryside, piled high with evergreens. But here is the problem. Britain doesn't have a commercial Christmas tree industry yet. There are no tree farms. There are no neat rows of Norman firs pruned into perfect cones. These trees are wild. They are the tops of spruce trees hacked off in the woods of Surrey and Kent, or thinnings from forestry plantations. You see a cart pull up, and a swarm of buyers descends on it. It's like Black Friday, but with more top hats and less polyester. Men are haggling over scraggly branches. "That one's bald on the left," one shouts. "It's got character." The seller yells back, "Sixpence." The trees themselves are. Let's be charitable and call them rustic. They are mostly Norway spruce, Picea abies, a species native to Europe, but widely planted in Britain. They have a lovely smell, but they have one fatal flaw. They drop their needles if you look at them funny. And in the overheated, dry air of a Victorian parlor, heated by coal fires, these trees are ticking time bombs of baldness. By Twelfth Night, most British living rooms will look like a pine needle crime scene. But the status-hungry Victorians don't care. They buy them up. You see a father walking away with a 4-foot spruce slung over his shoulder, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He has secured the asset. His family will not be shamed this year. Now, let's talk about the middle-class aspect of this. The aristocracy, like Queen Charlotte, had been doing this for decades. The poor, frankly, have bigger problems than decorating a tree. But the middle class, the engines of the Victorian economy, are the ones driving this trend. They are obsessed with emulating their betters. If the Queen does it, they must do it. This leads to a fascinating fringe economy. Since whole trees are expensive and hard to transport, a market emerges for artificial trees, but not the plastic ones, you know. We are talking about DIY monstrosities. You might see a family buying a wooden pole, drilling holes in it, and sticking loose branches of boxwood or holly into the holes to create a tree-like shape. It's the Frankenstein's monster of arboriculture. It looks vague, green, and pointy, and that's good enough. Others simply go for the top. Since most Victorian rooms have high ceilings but limited floor space, the fashion is often to buy just the top 3 feet of a fir tree and place it on a table. This is why the early Victorian trees look so stout and triangular in illustrations. They are literally just the tips of much larger trees. You navigate through the mud of the market, dodging a cart filled with holly. As sellers are shouting their wares. Christmas trees, fresh from the forest, fit for a queen. They know exactly which marketing button to push. The connection to royalty is the sales pitch. Historians still argue about the environmental impact of this sudden craze. Did the early Victorian Christmas devastate local woodlands? There are reports from the mid-19th century of landowners complaining about tree rustlers, people sneaking onto estates at night to chop the tops off prize firs. It became a genuine rural crime wave. The war on Christmas in the 1850s wasn't about coffee cups. It was about protecting your timber from festive vandals. As you watch the market empty out, the ground littered with broken twigs and rejected branches, you realize that something fundamental has shifted. The Christmas tree has moved from the realm of foreign curiosity to commodity. It has a price tag now. It has a supply chain. It has entered the capitalist machine. But acquiring the tree is only half the battle. Now, these triumphant fathers have to get the thing home, wrestle it into a pot of wet sand. Tree stands haven't been invented yet, and then face the most terrifying challenge of all, lighting it. You follow the man with the spruce tree as he hails a cab. He shoves the tree inside, needles showering the upholstery. He is heading home to a house filled with heavy drapes, paper decorations, and flammable crinolines. He is about to introduce a dry, resinous piece of wood to dozens of open flames. The cozy Victorian Christmas is about to get extremely dangerous. You step back from the curb, letting the cab rattle away into the London fog. You can almost hear the crackle of the fire already. The next phase of the tree's evolution isn't about botany or marketing. It's about physics, chemistry, and the frantic, desperate attempt to keep the holidays from turning into an inferno. You are now standing in the inner sanctum of the Victorian home, the drawing room. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight against the winter night. The fire in the hearth has been allowed to die down to a low slumber because the room is about to get very, very hot. It is Christmas Eve, the designated hour for the tree reveal, and the atmosphere is less festive. Holiday cheer and more. High-stakes bomb disposal operation. You watch as the father of the house steps forward. He looks nervous. He is holding a long taper, a lighter, and he is sweating. Beside him stands a servant or perhaps the eldest son, clutching a bucket of water and a long stick with a wet sponge tied to the end. This is not a cleaning implement. It is a piece of critical safety equipment known as a dowser. Welcome to the era of leave-fire arboriculture. In the modern world, you complain when a string of electric lights gets tangled. In the 1850s, the challenge is fundamentally different. You are trying to balance cylinders of burning wax on the flexible, drying branches of a dead tree. There are no clip-on candle holders, yet those clever little tin devices with the counterweights won't become common until later in the century. For now, the engineering is crude and terrifying. You lean in closer to inspect the mechanics. How do they stay up? The answer is a mix of brute force and hope. Some families use flexible wire, twisting the base of the candle onto the branch, often crushing the needles in the process. Others use long pins, heating them up and impaling the candle from the bottom, then stabbing it into the wood. But the most common, and perhaps most precarious, method is simply dripping hot wax onto the branch and sticking the candle in the puddle before it hardens. It's a glue gun solution in a pre-glue gun world. The father moves systematically around the tree. He lights the top candles first and works his way down. This is a crucial safety protocol to avoid burning his hand or setting his sleeve on fire. As each wick catches, a small golden halo of light blooms in the darkness. This is the moment where the risk pays off. You have to admit, it is breathtaking. Electric lights are static. They buzz with a cold, consistent frequency. But wax candles are alive. They flicker. They dance. They cast long, shifting shadows that make the tree seem to breathe. The light reflects off the gilded nuts and the few shiny trinkets, creating a soft, warm aura that feels almost holy. The smell is intoxicating, a heavy perfume of melting beeswax, if they are rich, or beef tallow, if they are budgeting, mixed with the sharp, terpene scent of heating pine needles. But do not get mesmerized. The danger is real. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The Victorian Christmas tree was not an all-day display. You didn't turn it on in the morning and leave it while you went to the store. The tree was lit for a strictly limited engagement, usually only 15 to 20 minutes on Christmas Eve, and perhaps once more on Christmas Day if the branches weren't too dry. It was a theatrical performance. The doors were opened, the children were allowed to gasp and stare, and the moment the needles started to smoke or a branch started to droop too close to a flame, the order was given, blow it out. You watch the douser on patrol. His eyes are darting back and forth. A candle tips slightly to the left. Swish. He nudges it back with the wet sponge. A spark lands on a dry twig. Dab. He extinguishes it instantly. He is the unsung hero of the Victorian holidays, the barrier between a Merry Christmas and a blackened ruin. This constant vigilance leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about Victorian fashion. The wide, expansive crinolines, hoop skirts, worn by women in the mid-19th century, were essentially giant tents of flammable fabric. There are tragic accounts of women brushing too close to the low-hanging branches of a Christmas tree and instantly igniting. The combination of the tree and the dress was so deadly that some household manuals suggested placing the tree on a high table or behind a barrier, specifically to protect the lady's fashion from the festive fire. As you watch the family basking in the glow, you realize that the transience of the light makes it more special. In your time, Christmas lights are ubiquitous. They are on lampposts, on houses, in shops. They are background noise. But here, the light is precious because it is fleeting. It consumes itself. The candles burn down, the wax drips onto the floor or onto the presents, adding a nice seal to the wrapping, and the magic consumes the fuel. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of this danger. Did the element of risk actually enhance the Victorian experience of Christmas? Some scholars suggest that the Victorians, who were obsessed with the sublime, a feeling of awe mixed with terror, found the burning tree to be a domestic version of a thunderstorm or a mountain peak. It was beautiful because it was wild. It was a piece of nature's raw power brought inside and barely controlled. It was a thrill. The father gives the signal. The candles are burning low. The risk is becoming too high. Blow them out, he says. The family moves in. Puff, puff, puff. One by one, the golden halos vanish. Thin trails of gray smoke rise from the blackened wicks, drifting up to the ceiling. The room plunges back into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the fire in the grate. The tree stands dark and silent again, a sleeping giant. The smell of extinguished candles, a distinct, acrid, nostalgic scent, fills the room. The children look disappointed, but also relieved. The tension breaks. They can now approach the tree to get their gifts without fear of incineration. You look at the bucket of water standing by the tree. It's full. The sponge is dripping. Tonight was a success. The house is still standing, but the tree is naked now. Without the light, the gaps in the branches are visible. The rustic nature of the spruce top is revealed. It needs more than just light. You leave the scent of extinguished candles behind and step into a different kind of fog, the metaphorical fog of the Victorian imagination. You are walking through the streets of London again, but this time, the city feels less like a market and more like a stage set. You are heading toward a townhouse at 48 Doughty Street, or perhaps Devonshire Terrace, depending on the exact year, the home of a man who is currently pacing his study with the manic energy of a caged tiger. This is Charles Dickens. And while Prince Albert provided the physical object of the season, this man is busy constructing its soul. you slip into his study. It is cluttered, filled with books, mirrors, and the scratching sound of a quill moving across paper at a furious speed. Dickens is not just writing. He is performing. He mutters dialogue to himself, pulls faces in the mirror to get the character expressions right, and occasionally laughs out loud. He is in the business of emotional engineering. Here is a mainstream historical fact that might surprise you. When Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843, the Christmas tree was not yet the dominant symbol of the holiday. If you read the book closely, there is no tree in Scrooge's counting house, nor in Bob Cratchit's humble home. When the ghost of Christmas Present appears, he sits on a throne of turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and seething bowls of punch. It is a cornucopia of calories, not forestry. So, why are you here in a section about the Christmas tree? Because Dickens did something more important than describing a fir tree. He created the fertile soil in which the tree could take root. He invented the Christmas spirit. Before Dickens, the holiday was a disjointed mix of religious observance and drunken revelry. Dickens rebranded it as a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. He linked the holiday inextricably to memory, to childhood, and to a bittersweet nostalgia for the past. And once the Illustrated London News dropped that viral image in 1848, Dickens, ever the savvy media mogul, realized that the tree was the literary fog of Charles Dickens dissipates, replaced by the biting, pristine cold of a high-altitude winter. You are no longer in London. You have traveled hundreds of miles east, deep into the Thuringian forest of Germany. You are standing in a narrow valley, surrounded by dense pines that groan under the weight of snow. The air smells of wood smoke and sulfur. This is the village of Lauchy, a place that is about to change the visual texture of Christmas forever. Lucia is a town built on breath and fire. Since the late 16th century, the people here have been glassblowers. They make beakers, drinking glasses, and pharmaceutical vials. But you are here in the late 1840s to witness a pivot born of necessity or perhaps poverty. You step into a small, cramped cottage. It is hot inside, unbearably hot. In the center of the room is a gas-fired lamp or a small furnace, glowing with a fierce blue-white heat. A man sits hunched over the flame, a long glass tube in his mouth. His cheeks are puffed out, his eyes focused with laser-like intensity. Around him, his entire family is working. This isn't a factory. It's a living room turned into a production line. Here is the origin story of the bauble. For centuries, the German Tannenbaum was decorated with real food apples, nuts, and wafers. But the legend says that one year, the glassblowers of Lauscha were too poor to afford real fruit and nuts to hang on their trees. So, being industrious artisans, they decided to fake it. They blew glass bubbles in the shape of apples and walnuts. You watch the master blower at work. He heats a section of the clear glass tube until it is molten and sagging like honey. Then, with a sudden, controlled exhalation, he expands it. Whoosh! The glass swells into a perfect sphere. It is a moment of alchemy. He twists it, breaks it off, and seals it. But a clear glass ball isn't very festive. It just looks like a bubble. To make it shine, to make it catch the candlelight of a Victorian parlor, they need a mirror finish. This is where the process gets chemically terrifying. You watch as an assistant, likely a child or the blower's wife, takes the fragile glass sphere. She pours a liquid mixture inside the stem. It contains lead or mercury. She swirls it around, coating the inside of the sphere. The heat of the glass reacts with the chemicals, creating a silvery, metallic coating on the inside. This is the mainstream historical fact. The first Christmas baubles were toxic mirrors. They used a lead tin alloy or mercury vapor to achieve that dazzling shine. If you broke one of these early ornaments, you weren't just sweeping up glass. You were creating a hazmat site in your living room. It wasn't until the 1870s, when a chemist named Justus von Liebig developed the safe silver nitrating process, that the ornaments became non-lethal. But standing here in the 1840s, you are watching people poison themselves for the sake of holiday cheer. The result, however, is undeniable. The lead-lined sphere catches the light from the furnace and throws it back with a fierce, metallic brilliance. It is heavier than a modern ornament-thick glass, heavy metal lining. It feels like a weapon. You look around the room. It's filled with these kugels. There are shapes emerging now that go beyond the simple sphere. You see glass pickles, the subject of a very persistent and debated American myth about hiding the pickle, which most Germans claim to have never heard of. Glass bunches of grapes and glass pine cones. They are coloring them now too, dipping the finished silver balls into lacquer mixed with aniline dyes, rich reds, deep blues, and golds. Here is a quirky fringe tidbit about these early ornaments. They weren't just for Christmas trees. The heavy glass spheres, often called witch balls, were originally hung in windows year-round to ward off evil spirits. The theory was that a witch would look into the reflective ball, see her own hideous reflection, and be so terrified she would flee. Or, alternatively, the ball would catch the evil eye and trap it inside the glass maze. The Christmas tree essentially co-opted this superstitious home security system and turned it into a decoration. You watch the family packing the cooled ornaments. They are wrapped in straw and packed into wooden crates. These crates are destined for the toy exporter Sonberg, and from there, they will travel to England and America. This is the moment the Christmas tree moves from edible to inedible. Think about the shift in psychology. Before Lausche, you ate the decorations. The tree was a harvest festival. You stripped the apples and nuts on 12th night and devoured them. But you can't eat a glass ball. Well, you can, but only once. The Lausche ornaments turned the tree into a permanent art installation. It meant you had to store things. It gave birth to the Christmas box in the attic. It introduced the concept of the heirloom ornament, the fragile object that gets passed down until a cat knocks it over in 1994. Historians still argue about the exact timeline of when these ornaments flooded the British market. Some say Prince Albert had a few, but they were rare luxuries until the 1860s. Others argue that the trade routes were faster, and that by the mid-1850s, wealthy Londoners were already hanging German toys of glass on their trees. You pick up one of the finished baubles. It is still warm. It is imperfect. You can see the swirl marks of the glass, the uneven thickness of the wall. It is breathless and fragile. It represents a massive leap in the technology of the holiday. The Victorian tree is becoming a multimedia experience. It has light, wax, it has nature, fur, and now it has industry, glass. The glassblower wipes sweat from his forehead. He is exhausted. His lungs are burning. He doesn't know that his little village is going to become the center of the Christmas world for the next century. He doesn't know that one day, an American entrepreneur named F.W. Woolworth will walk into a shop in Sonberg, buy every ornament he sees, and turn this cottage industry into a global empire. For now, it is just a family in a hot room, turning breath into light. You step back out into the snow. The contrast is shocking. The heat of the furnace versus the freezing Thuringian night. You look up at the real fir trees surrounding the village. They are covered in ice, glittering in the moonlight. You realize that the glassblowers are just trying to capture the look of ice on a branch and bring it indoors where it won't melt. But the tree needs more than just glass. It needs toys. It needs sugar. It needs to become a retail engine. The Victorian middle class is growing richer, and they want to spoil their children. The era of the homemade Christmas is fading. The era of the store-bought Christmas is arriving. You leave the sparkling valley of Lausche behind. You are heading back to London, to the gas-lit arcades and the bustling department stores. The tree is hungry. It demands to be fed with merchandise, and the shopkeepers of the empire are more than happy to oblige. You leave the frozen peaks of Germany and return to the fog-choked, gas-lit streets of London. But this time, the air smells sweeter. You are standing outside a confectioner's shop on Oxford Street. It is the mid-1850s, and the window display is a masterpiece of sugar engineering. You press your nose against the glass, just like the street urchins beside you, mesmerized by the sheer caloric density on display. The Christmas tree has arrived, yes, but now it needs to be fed. In the early years of the Victorian tree, the decorations were primarily edible. The tree was essentially a vertical buffet. You didn't just admire it, you grazed on it. But we aren't talking about tossing a few candy canes on a branch. The Victorians approached confectionery with the same seriousness they applied to bridge building. You step inside the shop. The smell of boiling sugar and toasted almonds hits you like a physical wave. You are here to investigate the sugar plum. You've heard the poem. You know that visions of sugar plums danced in children's heads. But here is a mainstream historical fact that might ruin your childhood image. A sugar plum is not a plum. It has never been a plum. It is, in fact, a seed or a nut, like a caraway seed or an almond, coated in layer upon layer of hard, boiled sugar. It is a comfort. It is essentially a jawbreaker the size of a hailstone. If you bit into a Victorian sugar plum, expecting a soft, fruity treat, you would crack a molar. They were labor-intensive luxury goods, requiring days of panning and tossing in sugar syrup. You watch the shopkeeper filling paper cornucopious cone-shaped containers decorated with lace and ribbon with these rock-hard treats. These cones are designed to be hung directly on the tree. The tree is becoming a delivery system for glucose. But sugar is just the gateway drug. As you move through the 1860s and 70s, the British economy is booming. The Industrial Revolution is churning out goods faster than people can buy them. The middle class has disposable income, and they have a new target for their spending: the nursery. The Christmas tree begins to groan under a new weight. It is no longer just for candles and sweets. It is becoming a display rack for toys. You wander down to the Lowther Arcade on the Strand, known as Toyland. It is a narrow, covered passageway packed with toy shops. It is loud, chaotic, and filled with parents in a panic. You see tin soldiers, wooden whistles, miniature drums, and dolls with porcelain faces that stare into your soul. Here is the problem, though: physics. The Norway spruce is a majestic tree, but its branches are flexible. They are designed to shed snow, not to hold a heavy, cast-iron mechanical monkey. You witness the struggle in a nearby home. A father is trying to tie a heavy wooden Noah's Ark to a lower branch. The branch sags dismally, dropping the ark onto the carpet. The tree looks lopsided. This logistical failure leads to a major shift in Christmas architecture. As toys get bigger, heavier, and more complex, thanks to industrial manufacturing, they migrate. They move from the branches to the floor. This is the birth of the presents under the tree tableau. It changes the visual weight of the holiday. The tree becomes the canopy, the shelter under which the real loot is piled. It transforms the tree from the gift itself, as it was for young Victoria, into a signpost pointing to the merchandise. This shift marks the moment the Christmas tree becomes a commercial engine. You see shopkeepers catching on. They realize that the tree is the ultimate marketing tool. They start setting up Christmas bazaars inside their stores. They create grottos. They realize that if you put a glowing tree in a window, people will walk in and buy things they don't need. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about the Dresden ornament. As the demand for unbreakable, hangable toys grew, German manufacturers, specifically in Dresden, created a solution: embossed cardboard. They took scraps of wet cardboard, pressed them into intricate molds, gilded them, and dried them. The result was a Dresden, a lightweight, golden shape that looked like metal but weighed nothing. You could hang a golden lion, a steamboat, or a fish on the flimsiest branch, and it would float there perfectly. These cardboard scraps are now some of the most expensive antique ornaments in the world, but at the time, they were the cheap, mass-produced answer to the sagging branch crisis. But not everyone is happy about this commercial explosion. You can hear the grumbling in the church pews. Historians still argue about the God versus Mammon debate that erupted in the Victorian era. As the tree became more laden with toys and gilded cardboard, religious traditionalists began to worry. Was the tree a pagan idol? Was it distracting from the Nativity? Some clergy argued that the tree was a secular intrusion, a celebration of materialism wrapped in fir needles. They pointed out correctly that there is no Christmas tree in the Bible. To counter this, a myth began to circulate, a sort of historical retcon. People started telling a story that Martin Luther, the great Protestant reformer, had invented the Christmas tree. The story went that Luther was walking home one winter night, saw the stars shining through the evergreens, and brought a tree inside to show his children, putting candles on it to represent the stars of heaven. It's a beautiful story. It is also almost certainly made up. There is zero evidence Luther did this, but the Victorians loved it. It gave the tree a Protestant pedigree. It legitimized the consumerism. It's not a shopping display, they could tell themselves. It's a tribute to Martin Luther. It was a brilliant bit of PR that allowed the pious British middle class to keep buying tin soldiers without feeling guilty. You stand in the middle of the Lowther Arcade, surrounded by the frenzy of the season. The air is thick with the sound of wind-up toys whirring in cash registers, or their early equivalents, ringing. The tree has successfully made the leap from the forest to the palace, and now to the shopping mall. It has become an industry. But amidst all this commerce, there is a practical problem developing back in the parlor. You have a dead tree in a bucket of sand. You have piles of toys on the floor. But the transition between the tree trunk and the floor is ugly. It's a bucket. It's a pot of dirt. It looks unfinished. And in the Victorian world, where even table legs were considered sometimes too racy to be exposed, you can't just have a naked tree trunk sticking out of a bucket. You need to cover it up. You need to dress the tree. You leave the toy shop, dodging a man carrying a massive rocking horse, and head back to the domestic sphere. You are about to witness the invention of a piece of holiday decor that you probably take for granted, but which speaks volumes about the Victorian obsession with modesty and aesthetics. It is time to look down at the base of the tree, where a new textile tradition is being stitched together. You are back in the drawing room, kneeling on the rug. The tree is lit briefly. The baubles are shining, and the sugar plums are hanging precariously. But as your eyes travel down from the glittering angel at the top, past the golden walnuts and the Dresden cardboard lions, you hit a visual speed bump. You reach the bottom. It is a disaster zone of aesthetics. Here is the dirty secret of the early Christmas tree. It has no feet. Unlike the modern artificial trees that click into a specialized stand, or the drilled trunk systems of today, the Victorian tree is essentially a stick jammed into a bucket, and not a nice bucket. We are talking about a galvanized pail, a wooden wash tub, or a heavy clay pot filled with wet sand, rocks, or even coal to keep the thing from tipping over and crushing the nanny. It looks industrial. It looks messy. And in a room where every inch of surface is covered with doilies, velvet, and fringe, This naked display of mechanics is simply unacceptable. You are witnessing the birth of the tree skirt, though at this stage, it is less a fashion statement and more of a cover-up operation. The Victorians have a reputation for being obsessed with covering things up. You've heard the myths that they put trousers on piano legs because the curves were too suggestive. While historians argue that the piano leg story is largely an exaggerated myth invented by later generations to mock Victorian prudishness, the underlying instinct was real. They hated unfinished surfaces. They hated dust. And they absolutely hated the sight of a rusty bucket sitting on an expensive Persian carpet. So, the Christmas tree mat is born. You watch the lady of the house unfurl a heavy piece of fabric. It isn't the flimsy red felt circle you buy at a discount store today. This is a piece of serious textile engineering. It is often green baize, like a billiard table, heavy velvet, or quilted satin. It is embroidered with incredible detail. You see scenes of winter stitched in Berlin wool work robins, holly leaves, geometric snowflakes. She wraps it around the base of the bucket. It drapes over the ugly pot, creating a soft, undulating mound of fabric that mimics a snowdrift. Suddenly, the tree isn't growing out of a bucket. It is rising magically from a mossy hillock. It grounds the fantasy. But the tree skirt serves a double purpose, one that is intensely practical for the housekeeping staff. Remember those spruce needles? The ones that fall if you so much as sneeze? The heavy wool or velvet mat acts as a debris catchment system. When Twelfth Night arrives and the tree is stripped, the servants can simply gather up the corners of the mat, trapping the thousands of dead needles inside, and carry the whole shedding mess out the back door. It is a primitive form of containment. Here is a quirky fringe tidbit about what lived on that skirt. In many German American and Moravian households, and trickling into British custom, the space under the tree wasn't just for gifts. It was for the putts. This was an elaborate miniature landscape. Families would spend weeks building intricate villages, nativity scenes, or wilderness dioramas at the base of the tree. They used moss, rocks, mirrors for lakes, and tiny wooden figures. The tree skirt wasn't just a rug. It was the terraform for a tiny world. You kneel closer to inspect the embroidery. The needlepoint is exquisite. It represents hours of labor by the women of the house. In a society where women's public lives were restricted, the domestic interior was their canvas. A beautifully stitched tree mat was a status symbol. It said, "We have the leisure time to make a rug that is only used for 12 days a year." But as you look at the heavy fabric, you realize it also reflects a deeper anxiety. The Victorians were trying to domesticate the wild. They brought a forest tree inside, which is a chaotic, pagan thing to do. By wrapping its roots in velvet and weighing it down with glass, they were taming it. They were dressing it in the uniform of civilization. The tree skirt is the final act of colonization, turning a wild fir into a piece of furniture. The skirt metaphor is apt. In an era where women wore crinolines that took up 5 feet of space, the tree was given a similar silhouette. It became triangular, wide at the bottom, draped in fabric. It fit the fashion of the times. You stand up, brushing lint from your knees. The tree is now fully dressed. It has a crown, the angel, jewelry, the glass baubles, and a skirt, the mat. It is a member of the family. But the British Empire is not just a rainy island in the North Atlantic. It is a global octopus with tentacles reaching into the tropics, the deserts, and the southern hemisphere. And the people sent to govern these far-flung outposts are reading the Illustrated London News too. They see the pictures of Victoria and Albert. They feel the pang of homesickness. They want the magic too. But there is a problem. Norway spruce does not grow in Mumbai. It does not grow in Cape Town. It certainly does not grow in the sweltering heat of an Australian December. You walk away from the cozy, velvet-draped parlor and step into a different kind of heat. You are about to travel to the edges of the map, where the determination to uphold British standards collides with the reality of biology. You are going to see what happens when you try to force a winter festival onto a summer climate. The results are sweaty, inventive, and occasionally a little bit sad. The heavy velvet curtains of the Victorian parlor close behind you, shutting out the London fog. You are moving fast now, faster than the speed of a steamship. You are chasing the red lines of the map, following the trade routes of the British Empire to places where snow is a rumor and winter is just a word in a dictionary. You step off a gangplank and are immediately hit by a wall of heat. It is a humid, suffocating blanket that smells of salt, spices, and wet earth. You are in Calcutta, or perhaps Sydney, or maybe Cape Town. The location doesn't matter as much as the temperature. It is December 25th, and it is 90 degrees in the shade. The cicadas are screaming like buzzsaws. The sun is a blinding white disk overhead. But you are with the British, and if there is one thing the British Empire is famous for, it is the absolute refusal to acknowledge that they are no longer in Surrey. You walk toward a colonial bungalow. It has wide verandas and high ceilings designed to catch the breeze. Inside, a family of expats is preparing for Christmas. They are wearing their Sunday best heavy wool suits, high collars, and corsets. They are sweating profusely. Their faces are flushed, not with festive cheer, but with impending heat stroke. But they will not undo a single button, because standards must be maintained. And in the corner of the room, standing as a defiant monument to homesickness, is the Christmas tree. This is where the story of the tree becomes a comedy of biological errors. You see, the Norway spruce, Picea abies, the darling of Prince Albert and the Illustrated London News, is a diva. It requires a cold dormancy period. It likes frost. If you plant a Norway spruce in the tropical heat of India or the baking summer of Australia, it doesn't just die. It seemingly melts. It turns brown and sheds its needles in protest within hours. So the colonists have to improvise. You look closely at the tree in the corner. It isn't a fir. It's a casuarina, often called a she-oak or an ironwood. It has needle-like foliage that hangs down in weeping gray-green curtains. It looks vaguely coniferous if you squint and have had enough sherry. Or perhaps it's a Norfolk Island pine, which is actually a tropical tree that just looks like a Christmas tree. A biological coincidence that saved thousands of colonial holidays. The family is decorating it with a desperation that is almost touching. They don't have fresh holly, so they use local red berries or hibiscus flowers. They don't have snow, so they simulate it. You watch as the mother drapes the branches with raw cotton wool sent from the mills, or perhaps dusts the tree with flour. This leads to a practical nightmare. In the heat of the tropics, flour and cotton wool are not just decorations. They are nesting materials. You watch a line of ants marching up the trunk of the casuarina, delighted by the buffet of sugar plums and flour dust. The tree is alive, but not in the way Dickens intended. Then there are the candles. You remember the dowser from the London parlor? He is needed here more than ever, but for a different reason. The wax candles, imported expense from England, are struggling. In the ambient heat of the room, they soften. They droop. You watch a candle slowly bend over like a wilting flower, dripping hot wax onto the floor or worse, onto the cotton wool snow, creating a highly flammable fuse. The visual is absurd. Here is a weeping ant-infested tropical tree, covered in melting wax and cotton, standing in a sweltering room while a family sings in the bleak midwinter and sweats into their pudding. It is the ultimate triumph of culture over climate. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The export of the Christmas tree idea was one of the most successful soft power campaigns of the Victorian era. By the 1860s and 70s, you could find Christmas trees in the grand hotels of Cairo, the hill stations of Simla, and the sheep stations of the Australian outback. The Illustrated London News traveled on every mail ship, and wherever the picture of the royal family went, the tree followed. It became a symbol of civilization. To put up a tree in the middle of the jungle was to declare that you are still part of the tribe. But this imposition of a northern winter festival onto the southern hemisphere creates a fascinating cultural tension. Historians still argue about the nature of this imperial Christmas. Was it a harmless act of nostalgia? A way for lonely immigrants to feel connected to the home they left behind? Or was it a form of botanical imperialism? An arrogant refusal to adapt to the local environment? A way of stamping British identity onto a landscape that didn't want it? Some scholars point out that the obsession with the traditional Christmas prevented colonists from developing their own local traditions for generations. Instead of celebrating the summer solstice or the harvest, which is what December actually is in the southern hemisphere, they locked themselves indoors and pretended it was snowing. It was a collective hallucination sanctioned by the crown. You notice a peculiar detail on this tropical tree. Among the melting candles and glass baubles, there are some strange additions. You see bright beetle wings used as sequins. You see feathers from local parrots. You see shells. This is the quirky fringe tidbit of a colonial tree. Despite the effort to replicate England, the local reality inevitably leaked in. In Australia, the Christmas bush, Ceratopelum gummiferum, became a popular substitute because it blooms with brilliant red sepals exactly in December. It didn't look like a fir, but it was red and green, and crucially, it didn't die in the heat. The colonists began to hybridize their celebrations, mixing the rigid German Victorian template with the riotous flora of their new homes. You watch the family sit down to dinner. The roast goose is greasy in the heat. The plum pudding is heavy enough to sink a ship. They pull the crackers, which snap with a damp thud because of the humidity, and put on the paper hats. They toast the queen. They look at the drooping casuarina tree. For a moment, the heat fades. The buzzing of the flies recedes. In the glow of the bending candles, they are back in Sussex. They are back in the snow. The tree is a teleportation device. It works, but the illusion is fragile. A large beetle flies into the room and crashes into the tree, knocking a glass bauble to the floor. Crash. The spell breaks. They are back in the tropics. The mother sighs and fans herself with a napkin. You leave them to their sweltering feast. You walk out onto the veranda. The Southern Cross is high in the sky. The air is thick with the scent of eucalyptus and dust. The Victorian Christmas tree has conquered the world, but it has had to mutate to survive. It has proven that it is more than just a piece of wood. It is an idea. And ideas are waterproof, heatproof, and bug-proof. But back in the shivering cold of the Northern Hemisphere, the tree is evolving in a different direction. It isn't struggling with heat. It is struggling with weight. The glass ornaments from Laosha are getting bigger. The toys are getting heavier. The candles are still dangerous. The tree needs a new wardrobe. It needs something to fill the gaps, something to catch the light, something that looks like ice but doesn't melt. You step off the veranda and into the slipstream of history. You are heading back to the cold, to the factories of the industrial North. You are about to witness the invention of the most divisive decoration in history. It's shiny, it's stringy, and in the Victorian era, it was made of pure lead. Get ready to drape the tree in heavy metal. You return from the sweltering heat of the colonies to the familiar, drafty comfort of the British drawing room. But the tree you find there has evolved yet again. It is late in the Victorian era now, perhaps the 1880s or 90s. The tree is no longer just a display of greenery and light. It has become a sculpture of shimmering metal. As you step closer, you notice that the branches are dripping with something that catches the candlelight in long vertical streaks. It looks like liquid starlight frozen in mid-air. This is tinsel, or as the Germans call it, lametta. But before you imagine the fluffy plastic garlands you buy at the supermarket for $1, you need to adjust your expectations. Victorian tinsel is not fluffy. It is not plastic. It is heavy metal. You reach out to touch a strand. It feels cold, smooth, and surprisingly substantial. If you were to drape a handful of this over your hand, it would have the weight of a heavy necklace. This is because original tinsel was made from real silver. Invented in Nuremberg back in the early 17th century, it was created by machines that pulled silver bullion into threads so thin they were almost liquid, which were then hammered flat. It was a byproduct of the master silversmiths, a way to turn precious metal into decoration. However, the Victorians discovered a fatal flaw with silver tinsel. It hated the Victorian home. Between the coal fires, the gas lamps, and the burning wax candles on the tree itself, the air in a 19th century parlor was a chemical soup of sulfur and carbon. Silver tinsel didn't stay silver for long. Within days, it would tarnish, turning a dull, brownish black. The ice would look like it had been dragged through a chimney. So manufacturers switched to a new material. They needed something shiny, malleable, cheap, and resistant to tarnish. They chose lead. Here is a mainstream historical fact that should make you wash your hands immediately. For a significant portion of the late Victorian and Edwardian eras, tinsel was made of lead foil. It was essentially thin strips of toxic metal. When you hung it on the tree, it didn't float in the breeze. It hung dead straight, pulled down by its own gravity. This created a very specific aesthetic that you see in old photographs, the icicle look. The tinsel didn't spiral around the tree. It dripped from the branches like rain. It was beautiful, elegant, and slowly poisoning the children who played with it. You watch a family decorating their tree with this Staniel tin lead alloy. They handle it with reverence. Because it is metal, it is reusable. You don't throw this tinsel away. You carefully pick each strand off the tree on 12th night, smooth it out between the pages of a book, and pack it away in tissue paper. It is an investment. But why cover a tree in metal strips at all? Why hide the greenery? This brings us to a delightful piece of folklore that parents would whisper to their children while draping the lead strips. It is the legend of the Christmas spider. The story goes like this. Once, there was a poor widow who lived in a cold, drafty hut with her children. She managed to get a Christmas tree, perhaps a pine cone that grew into a sapling, but she had absolutely no money for decorations. No glass from Lauscha, no beeswax candles, not even a sugar plum. On Christmas Eve, she went to bed heartbroken, leaving the tree bare and dark. During the night, the house spiders came out of the cracks in the floor. They crawled all over the tree, exploring the branches, weaving their webs from top to bottom. By morning, the tree was covered in sticky gray cobwebs. It looked like a haunted house prop. But then, depending on which version of the legend you prefer, either the Christ child or Father Christmas arrived to deliver the gifts. He saw the tree covered in webs and knew the mother would be devastated. He couldn't remove the webs because spiders are God's creatures too and industrious workers. So instead, he touched them. Instantly, the gray silk turned into sparkling gold and silver. When the widow woke up, the tree wasn't covered in bugs. It was covered in precious metal. It was the most beautiful tree in the world. And that, the Victorians would say, is why we hang tinsel. To remember the spiders who tried to decorate the tree and the miracle that turned their work into silver. This legend is a fascinating fringe tidbit because it completely recontextualizes the Victorian aesthetic. It explains the messy look. In many households, the tinsel wasn't placed strand by strand. It was thrown in handfuls to simulate the chaotic, organic nature of a spiderweb. It also explains the persistent presence of spider-shaped ornaments on Victorian trees, a detail that often horrifies modern viewers who associate spiders with Halloween. If you see a glittering spider ornament on an antique tree, it isn't a nightmare. It's a symbol of good luck and prosperity. Scholars and folklorists still argue about the true geographic origin of this legend. Most point to Ukraine or Germany as the source, citing the Eastern European tradition. The shimmering curtain of lead tinsel falls away, revealing a scene that is far quieter, far darker, and infinitely more somber. You have traveled to the Isle of Wight, to the seaside retreat of Osborne House. It is January 1901. The 19th century, a century that felt like it would last forever, has officially run out of sand. You are standing in the Queen's private apartments. The air here is heavy, smelling of sea salt, medicinal ether, and the lingering scent of old lavender. The blinds are drawn. The world outside is holding its vigil, waiting for the news that everyone knows is coming. Queen Victoria, the woman who gave her name to the age, the woman who sat on the throne for 63 years, is fading. But look into the corner of the room. The ghost of Christmas is still here. It is mid-January, yet the Christmas trees are still standing. This is a deliberate choice. For Victoria, the holiday was never really about the calendar. It was about the memory. Ever since Prince Albert died in 1861, she has preserved the traditions he established with a rigor that borders on the pathological. She froze the holiday in amber. For 40 years, she has ordered the same trees, the same gingerbread, the same specific gifts, arranged exactly as Albert liked them. The tree isn't just a decoration anymore. It is a shrine to a dead husband. You approach the tree in her sitting room. It is a tabletop tree, true to the 1840s style she grew up with, not the massive floor-to-ceiling monsters that the nouveau rich are installing in their London mansions. It is covered in real wax candles, though they remain unlit now. The Queen sits in her chair, her eyesight failing, her body shrinking into her black dress. She looks at the tree, and you wonder what she sees. Does she see the tinsel? Or does she see the ghost of the handsome German prince who brought the forest to Windsor 60 years ago? Here is a mainstream historical fact. Victoria's obsession with Christmas trees actually increased as she got older. By the end of her reign, she wasn't just setting up a tree for the family. She was commissioning trees for practically everyone she had ever met. There are records of her ordering dozens of trees to be set up in the servants' halls, the ladies-in-waiting's quarters, and even the local schools. She became the Oprah of forestry. You get a tree, and you get a tree. It was a way of projecting her maternal benevolence over the entire household hierarchy. But there is a melancholy to this scene. The world has moved on. While Victoria sits here with her wax candles, the outside world is electrifying. In 1882, an associate of Thomas Edison named Edward Johnson wired the first Christmas tree with electric bulbs in New York. By 1901, wealthy society hostesses in London are starting to experiment with fairy lights. They are safer, brighter, and don't require a man with a wet sponge on standby. But Victoria refused them. She stayed with the living flame. She stayed with the danger and the warmth. She was a Victorian to the bitter end, suspicious of the cold buzz of modernity. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate about the end of the Victorian Christmas. Historians argue whether the traditional Christmas we think of today is actually a Victorian invention or an Edwardian refinement. They suggest that Victoria's version, sentimental, handmade, religious, died with her, and that the commercial, electric, mass-market Christmas was ushered in by her son, Edward VII. Edward was a man who loved luxury, technology, and parties. He didn't want a weeping casuarina or a sentimental shrine. He wanted a show. As you watch the Queen dozing in her chair, you realize you are witnessing the passing of the torch. The Coburg Christmas, that intimate German candlelit ritual, is taking its final breath. The tree has grown too big for the palace. It has escaped into the wild. It belongs to the department stores now. It belongs to the empire. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the atmosphere of these final royal Christmases. They were surprisingly spooky. Victoria loved ghost stories, a taste she shared with Dickens. In her later years, the festive season at Osborne House involved not just carols, but seances and the telling of eerie tales. The tree stood witness to a court that was obsessed with the afterlife. The spirit of Christmas was often quite literal. On January 22, 1901, the Queen dies. The news ripples out across the globe via the telegraph cables that connect the empire. The mother is gone. You watch as the household goes into deep mourning. The black crepe is brought out. But what happens to the trees? They are dismantled. The wax candles are packed away. The glass ornaments from Lauscha are wrapped in tissue paper. The needle-strewn mats are shaken out. The era of the Queen's tree is over. But the silence in the room is deceptive. Outside the gates of Osborne House, the tradition is not dying. It is mutating. The middle classes are not taking their trees down in solidarity. They are buying bigger ones. The death of the Queen releases the tree from its royal tether. It no longer needs the sanction of the monarchy to exist. It has become a folk custom, as British as a cup of tea, which, ironically, is also an import. You walk through the silent corridors of the house. You can hear the wind howling off the Solent. It rattles the windows, just as it did in the pre-Victorian days. But the darkness isn't as absolute as it used to be. Even in the gloom of morning, the memory of the light persists. You step out onto the terrace. The flag is at half-mast. The world feels colder, grayer. The 20th century has arrived with its steel, its electricity, and its looming wars. The fragile glass baubles and the flickering wax candles seem woefully unprepared for the violence that is coming. How can a simple fir tree survive the machine age? How can a symbol of 19th century domesticity survive the trenches of the First World War or the blitz of the second? The answer lies not in the private parlor, but in the public square. The tree is about to leave the house. It is about to become citizen. It is going to grow to 60 feet tall and stand in the center of London, not as a decoration, but as a diplomat. You pull your coat tight against the 1901 chill. You are leaving the Victorian era behind. You are heading to the future, to a place called Trafalgar Square. The Queen is dead, but the tree? The tree is just getting started. You leave the hushed, lavender-scented grief of Osborne House and step into the roar of modern London. The years flash by like frames in a silent movie, speeding up into Technicolor. You see the flickering gas lamps replaced by harsh electric streetlights. You see the horse-drawn carriages vanish, replaced by black taxis and red double-decker buses. You see the skyline rise, bombed flat, and rise again in steel and glass. You are standing in Trafalgar Square. It is a freezing December evening in the post-war era, perhaps the late 1940s or early 50s. Noise of the city is deafening, a constant thrum of engines and voices. But in the center of the chaos, rising like a green obelisk against the gray stone of the National Gallery, is the ultimate evolution of Queen Victoria's tabletop fur. It is the Trafalgar Square Christmas tree, and it is massive. This is no longer a spruce top hacked from a Surrey woodlot. This is a Norwegian spruce, Picea abies, over 60 feet tall, a forest giant that has been growing since before Victoria died. It hasn't been brought here by a homesick prince. It has been shipped across the North Sea by the city of Oslo. Here is the mainstream historical fact that defines the modern British tree. Since 1947, the people of Norway have gifted a tree to the people of London every single year. It is a token of gratitude for British support during World War II, specifically for hosting the Norwegian king and government in exile while their country was occupied by the Nazis. Think about the journey this concept has taken. It started as a German exclusivity, Queen Charlotte. It became a German-British family affair, Victoria and Albert. And now, after 2 world wars where Britain and Germany were bitter enemies, the tree has shed its German baggage completely. It has been rebranded as a symbol of Scandinavian friendship and Allied resilience. The tree is a diplomat. You watch the lighting ceremony. There are no buckets of water or wet sponges here. There are hydraulic lifts. The tree is draped in vertical strings of energy-efficient lights, a specific Norwegian style of hanging lights that looks like weeping willow branches. It is plugged into the grid. It is safe, regulated, and inspected by health and safety officers. But look at the crowd. They are looking up, their faces illuminated by the electric glow. The expression is exactly the same as the children in the 1848 woodcut. The technology has changed, the politics have shifted, but the awe is identical. The tree still works. It still pierces the darkness of the northern winter and says, "Look, light." This is the final victory of the tree. It has moved from the private sphere to the public sphere. In the Victorian era, the tree was about the nuclear family locking the doors and celebrating inside. In the modern era, the tree is about the community gathering outside. It anchors the city. You walk through the crowd. You see tourists taking photos with smartphones or clunky film cameras, depending on the decade. You see office workers rushing home. You see the tree reflected in the wet pavement. But the tree hasn't just conquered the square. It has conquered the calendar. In Victoria's day, the tree went up on Christmas Eve and came down on Twelfth Night. Now, the Christmas creep has pushed the season back to November. The tree is a commercial beacon that signals the start of the fiscal quarter. It is a marathon runner, not a sprinter. And what about the decorations? You look closely. The Trafalgar tree is surprisingly minimal. No tinsel, no baubles, just lights. It is a return to the natural aesthetic, a rejection of the cluttered Victorian excess. It stands confident in its own greenery. But in the homes of the people watching, the Victorian legacy is running wild. If you could X-ray the living rooms of London right now, you would see millions of trees. Some are plastic, the ultimate 20th century convenience. Some are fiber optic. Some are upside down, a weird fad that keeps coming back. But they are all descendants of that first yew branch on Charlotte's table. They all have the skirt to hide the stand. They all have the star or angel on top. They all serve as the glowing hearth of the home. Historians and sociologists argue that the Christmas tree is the most successful ritual object in modern history. It is a syncretic symbol. It absorbs everything. It absorbed pagan solstice rites, Christian theology, royal branding, industrial manufacturing, and global capitalism. And it synthesized them into a single needle-dropping object that everyone agrees on. It is a survival machine. You stand at the base of the Trafalgar giant. You smell the pine resin faint, battling with the diesel fumes, but still there. It is the smell of the Thuringian forest. It is the smell of Windsor Castle. It is the smell of 1,000,000 living rooms. You realize that the boring dreamer journey you have taken tonight is actually a circle. You started in the dark, pre-Victorian void, yearning for light. You watched a lonely princess find comfort in a glowing branch. You watched a prince build a bridge to his homeland with fir trees. You watched glassblowers, writers, and shopkeepers add their layers to the myth. And now you stand in the light again. The tree didn't just change British living rooms. It changed the way humans experience time. It created a season out of the bleakest part of the year. It gave us a reason to look forward to the dark. As the bells of St. Martin in the Fields begin to toll, signaling the late hour, you take one last look at the lights. They blur slightly in the mist, looking like wax candles for just a second. The ghosts of Victoria, Albert, Dickens, and the Lauscha glassblowers are all there, hiding in the branches. They built this. And you, by simply sitting in your living room and staring at a pine tree, are keeping it alive. The city sleeps. The tree stands watch. The tradition is safe.